case I'm talking about, this particular case I'm talking about, I said that, well, it looks like you're going to have too much virtual currency accumulate in your system, which means that people will lose interest in that currency and they're not going to buy any more of that from you. And, well, they went ahead and launched it anyway. And I'm not going to mention what company it was, but it turns out that in this case, I'm glad to say it was right, unfortunate for them, and they had to adjust it afterwards. So I think in this sort of sense, macroeconomics, very simple stuff can matter even if you're running a very, very kind of simple system.
Okay, so we're going to open it up to questions in a moment, but before we go there, one question that I had over lunch, at least, was, I'm sitting there with 3 eminent PhDs in economics and, having this great conversation, and I said, okay, so if I'm a game designer, how do I start? Because, Vili actually said, well, you modeled it as a general equilibrium problem, and I was like, So would you guys, how would you get someone started? What do they need to know in order to start applying economic principles inside their games?
Who starts? We're going to start with it's age before. All right. Well, I think, and this comes from our conversation over lunch as well. The game design business has got to understand that now that everything is going social and online, that you need social science. So, I mean, I think one point of consensus was to hire more game designers who have backgrounds in fields like sociology and economics, not just the kind of fine arts, humanities backgrounds that we've seen. Writers, for example. No knock on writers, spinners of lore and so on, but it's not enough to just understand the psychology of an individual's reaction to a game mechanic. Now you need to have people who understand how communities react to policies. Now, I didn't mention this over lunch, but public policy would probably be a really good training for someone, because the government does exactly what a manager of a large game does. They try to collect, if they're really trying, if they're sincere, not clear. But if they are trying, what they're trying to do is collect interest and then promulgate policies that make people happy. It's exactly the same sort of problem. Now, if you're at the point where you're trying to go out and get all this knowledge for yourself, I would not advise getting an advanced PhD in any of these fields, because I find that what's most helpful for me to understand what's going on in a particular game is not the forefront of the research, but rather a really, really deep understanding of the basics. Okay, and when I say deep, the specifics of that are, okay, I read about supply and demand, and it was written by someone who's talking about the garment sector in the 1950s, and I need to understand this at such a deep level that I can take the core part of it out of that direction and that intent and that frame and apply it to my game. So, deep understanding of basic macroeconomic and microeconomic theories. And then a third area, and there's nowhere to go for this, it's if you go into behavioral economics, which is kind of this third area, it's not the sort of neoclassical theory. It's more stuff about, like, how do people feel joy psychologically when they do various things in the economy. I can tell you that there's no research right now. No one knows why the dual currencies and station cash, why that did not break immersion. I certainly thought it was going to. I certainly thought this room would never happen, right? Because the minute, people started selling currencies for money, I thought, that's it. Nobody's going to want to play those games anymore. And hey, I was wrong about that. I mean, this economy is really blowing up. But there wasn't any research to say how does immersion react to currencies. There's no research right now that explains to us why it's fun to make, tier 5 leather handcrafted gloves 47,000 hours so that you can make, the advanced ones. Why? How is that fun? It's not really understood in terms of psychology. So that's like the third area. And so it's like the basics in some of this stuff, micro and macro, and then in behavioral, it's kind of a free-for-all. That's my take.
Yeah, that's basically what we discussed over lunch, and we all agreed on. And actually having 3 economists agreeing on something is quite an event. So I would say that, and just to add to that, is that yes, get yourself acquainted with economics and get a deep understanding of the basics, but then don't be afraid to get advice. And as Vili just described earlier, take that advice once it's given, and because it is the basic principles that are at place in a virtual world, just like in real life. Because we always have to remember that even though the world is virtual, the people are real. And they are making decisions based on their experience in real life as well. And using the same principles you can then use the same principles to understand these two different worlds, even though the results might be different given different regulations within these worlds. So, get your basic understanding, but don't be afraid to get advice. And it doesn't mean that you have to have an in-house economist hired. You only do that if you have a large, complex universe like EVE Online, or a very large subscriber base and a lot of numbers that you have to crunch. Even a small company, a startup, can get an advice that could get them a long way.
Yeah, I'd love to say that, you have to hire me and my colleagues, but I do think I agree with you in that it's not really necessary to have a PhD in economics to do this stuff unless you have a real huge virtual economy like EVE Online. In fact, it's perhaps it's better even not to, because like we discussed over lunch, a lot of the really advanced theoretical stuff in economics is really inapplicable to a lot of the very practical problems that you have in game design. And it's really the textbook entry-level stuff that for the most part you're actually applying. My PhD is not in economics. I'm PhD in economic sociology. I only have bachelor level economic studies. And one of the things that's sort of very important to understand in virtual economies is why, like Ted said, why do people find certain things fun, and why do people find certain goods attractive and interesting? And economics doesn't really answer that, because in economics the question of preferences, why do people want some thing A over thing B, is extrinsic to the theory. It's not explained by economic theory. It's taken as an assumption that people prefer some things over other things, and it's moreover presumed that more is always better. But sometimes in a virtual economy you notice that if you have too much of something, it spoils the challenge of the game, and it can in fact decrease welfare rather than increasing it. So there we get to the other social sciences disciplines like psychology and sociology, which go more into what makes people tick. What are the things that people really desire and go for in life. And so I think that in all of these fields, basics is enough. You don't really have to have a PhD.
No, absolutely agree. And 2 points I want to pick up on that is, number one, when we're dealing with online communities today, we have to think about it in a much interdisciplinary way. You have to have different kinds of experts on your team, both from the sociology field, psychology, and economics. So, of course, you won't be able to hire all of them if you're a small company, but having it as a part of your staff or having access to advice is very important. And start thinking about your community as something that is a set of real life people. In EVE Online, we not only have economists on our team, we got people with business degrees in the development team. We have people in my team, in the research and statistics team, that have degrees in philosophy, are dealing with in-game democratical system. And all of that is simply because we are dealing with a community, a universe.